endless sea of white, untouched by human feet. The crisp air filled the lungs of those brave enough to venture into the cold, and the quiet sound of snow crunching under boots was almost meditative. But for one elderly woman and her companion, that serenity would soon be shattered. Margaret, a frail woman in her 70s, had always dreamed of visiting the mountains. She had heard so much about their beauty and majesty, but life's complications had always kept her grounded. Today, however, she found herself on the side of a mountain, bundled in layers of thick clothing, her heart racing as she gazed at the scenery. Her companion, Elon Musk, a man who had become famous not only for his innovations but for his commitment to change, was walking beside her. Elon had come to admire Margaret for her wisdom, her resilience, and her determination. He had promised to take her on this trip as a thank you for her support during a charity event he had hosted a year ago. It was meant to be a day of relaxation, a brief escape from the pressures of their lives. Elon kept a steady pace, occasionally looking back at Margaret, ensuring she was keeping up. The day was starting to wind down, the light beginning to fade as the sun set behind the mountain range. Margaret's breath was shallow, the cold air making it difficult to breathe. She clutched her chest, feeling her heart race, but she brushed it off, not wanting to slow them down. She didn't want to ruin the beautiful moment they were having. But then it happened. A sound, a crack of thunderous force, deep within the mountain. It was followed by a rumble, then a sudden shift in the snow above them. Elon stopped dead in his tracks, his instincts immediately kicking in. His eyes scanned the horizon, and he felt his stomach twist. An avalanche. The wall of snow came tumbling down, moving faster than either of them could react. Elon's first thought was to get Margaret to safety. He turned to her, but before he could speak, she fell to the ground, overwhelmed by the weight of the snow rushing toward them. "Elon," Margaret gasped, her voice weak as she struggled to rise. "Help me!" Elon's heart pounded in his chest as he turned and reached for her. Without thinking, he rushed to her side. The snow was already closing in, but Elon grabbed Margaret by the arms, trying to pull her toward him. "Hold on to me," he shouted. But the snow was falling faster now, the world turning white with each passing second. Margaret was shaking, panic rising in her eyes. The avalanche was upon them in an instant. Elon shoved Margaret forward, pushing her away from the worst of the snow, trying to shield her from the worst of the storm. His heart was racing, and his breath came out in frantic bursts. He knew there was only one way to ensure she would survive. "I'm not going to make it," Elon yelled, pushing Margaret further from the avalanche's path, trying to create some distance. "No!" Margaret screamed, the snow surrounding them rapidly. Her voice was barely audible over the roar of the falling snow. "You don't have to do this. We'll be okay. You'll be okay. I can't lose you." But Elon's face was calm, resolute. He had made a choice. Margaret's eyes widened with realization. No," she reached out, but it was too late. In that moment, the full force of the avalanche crashed down, burying Elon beneath a pile of snow. Margaret screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the relentless snow. Her heart was breaking as she tried to dig herself free from the snow, but it was nearly impossible. She could barely move her legs, the snow weighing her down. "Elon," she called, her voice desperate. She reached for the snow, trying to claw her way through, but the weight of the avalanche was crushing her. There was no way she could get out on her own. Then, to her amazement, she felt a hand on her arm, gently pulling her free. It was a miracle that she had survived the avalanche, and the only thing that mattered was getting out. It took several long minutes of effort, but Margaret was finally free, gasping for breath as she was pulled out of the snow. She saw the man who had saved her, the same man who had just sacrificed everything for her. She looked back toward the snow, her heart breaking as she realized Elon Musk was still buried beneath it. The snow had stopped falling, and the world was eerily quiet. Margaret stumbled forward, her legs shaking with exhaustion, but she couldn't bear to leave Elon behind. He had saved her. He had made sure she had a chance to survive, to live another day, while he gave his life. She collapsed on the ground, feeling the bitter cold sting her face as she tried to catch her breath. The overwhelming feeling of grief hit her, and she didn't know how long she stayed there alone in the snow until she was found by a rescue team that had been sent to search for survivors. Hours later, when she was finally safely inside a warm cabin, Margaret tried to process everything that had happened. The rescuers had found her, but they couldn't find Elon. She kept imagining that he might be somewhere out there, alive, maybe buried, but not lost. But in her heart, she knew that the chances of finding him were slim. The entire world would soon hear about Elon Musk's act of heroism. His sacrifice, his selflessness, was something that no one would ever forget. Margaret had lived a life full of ups and downs, but she would always remember the day when she was saved by a man who had everything to live for, but chose to give it all away to protect her. Days passed, and the rescue teams searched tirelessly for Elon, but they found nothing. His body was never recovered from the snow, and many believed that he had been lost to the avalanche forever. Margaret couldn't bring herself to say goodbye. She still held on to the hope that he would return, that somehow, against all odds, Elon Musk had survived. But deep down, she knew he hadn't. The world had lost a visionary, a leader, and above all, a man who had sacrificed his life for someone else's safety. In the days that followed, Margaret visited the place where Elon had saved her, standing in the quiet, still snow. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent thank you. The world would mourn the loss of Elon Musk, but for Margaret, he would forever be remembered as the man who gave everything to save her. She would carry his legacy in her heart forever, and his act of heroism would serve as a constant reminder of the power of selflessness. The days after the avalanche felt like an unending blur for Margaret. The weight of grief pressed heavily on her chest, but she was determined to carry on. Elon Musk's sacrifice had not only saved her life but had changed the way she saw the world forever. His heroism wasn't something that could be easily forgotten. It was something that would live on in the hearts of everyone who had heard the story, and she knew she had a responsibility to make sure his legacy was honored. Margaret spent the following weeks in a haze, trying to put one foot in front of the other, trying to carry the memory of Elon with her. She spoke with the police and the rescue teams multiple times, reliving the events of that fateful day. They had found traces of Elon's jacket and some belongings buried deep in the snow, but his body had never been recovered. The official reports declared him missing, presumed dead. As the days turned into weeks, Margaret made the decision to hold a small, private ceremony to honor Elon's life. She didn't want his story to be buried, lost in the flood of news stories that came and went. She wanted people to know that Elon's sacrifice was not just a headline, but a real act of bravery that had affected her in a way that words could never truly capture. The ceremony was held at a small chapel nestled in the mountains, just a few miles from the site of the avalanche. Margaret invited a few close friends, a handful of Elon's colleagues, and a few of the people who had worked alongside him. The room was filled with somber faces, all of them touched by Elon's legacy in one way or another. As Margaret stood before the gathering, she felt a sense of peace wash over her, the weight of her grief momentarily lifted. The ceremony was simple but powerful. There were no grand speeches or extravagant gestures, just people who knew Elon for the man he was, a visionary, a leader, and a hero. Margaret stood at the front, holding a small framed photograph of Elon. It was one of the few photos she had of him, smiling, relaxed, his eyes filled with that familiar warmth and determination. She spoke softly, her voice steady despite the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice catching slightly. "I never imagined that I would be standing here without Elon. I never imagined I would lose him so suddenly, but he gave everything to save me. And for that, I will be forever grateful." She paused, collecting her thoughts, feeling the weight of the room's attention on her. Elon was more than just a tech innovator. He was a man of action, someone who believed in making the world a better place, no matter the cost. He was kind, thoughtful, and above all, selfless. He sacrificed his life for me, and in doing so, he taught me more about courage than I could ever explain. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes, but she wiped them away and continued. "I know that his legacy will live on in the work that he did, in the changes he made in this world. But most importantly, his legacy will live on in the way we choose to care for one another. I'll carry his memory with me every day, and I promise that I'll honor his sacrifice by making sure the world never forgets what he did for me, and for all of us." The room fell silent as Margaret placed the photograph on the altar, her heart heavy but full of gratitude. She stood there for a moment, silently honoring the man who had given everything to protect her. And though Elon was gone, his impact was far from over. News of Elon Musk's heroic act quickly spread across the globe. It was a story that transcended the typical headlines about his work in technology and space exploration. People across the world were moved by his selflessness. From tech enthusiasts to everyday citizens, Elon's sacrifice resonated deeply. In the weeks following his disappearance, tributes began pouring in from all corners of the globe. People who had never met Elon shared stories of how he had inspired them, how his work had changed their lives. But it was the story of his heroism that really captured the world's attention. The media coverage was intense, and people began to see Elon in a new light. No longer just the billionaire CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, Elon Musk became a symbol of selflessness and courage. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. People who had previously criticized him for his bold statements and unconventional methods now hailed him as a hero. Around the world, memorials were set up in his honor. Small tributes, candles, photographs, handwritten notes were placed in parks, at spaceports, and even at Tesla dealerships. The world had lost someone who had changed the course of human history, but they had also gained a reminder of the power of human kindness. In the United States, politicians and leaders spoke out, calling for a day of remembrance for Elon Musk. The Elon Musk Foundation, which had been focused on advancing science and technology, was restructured to include a focus on humanitarian efforts, ensuring that his legacy of helping others would live on through the work of the foundation. Margaret knew that the world would remember Elon Musk. He had changed the world in ways that no one could fully comprehend, and his influence would continue long after his death. But the real change began with the individuals he had touched. His impact would ripple through countless lives, shaping the future in ways that no one could predict. In the months following Elon's death, Margaret found herself reflecting deeply on her own life. She had been the recipient of Elon's kindness, and now she felt a responsibility to carry that torch forward. She knew that she couldn't simply let the world remember Elon Musk for what he had done. She needed to act. Margaret had always been an advocate for social causes, but Elon's sacrifice made her realize that there was so much more she could do. She decided to start a foundation in Elon's name, a foundation dedicated to helping those in need, especially in the areas of education, healthcare, and environmental sustainability. The foundation would focus on providing opportunities for underprivileged communities, offering grants for education, funding healthcare initiatives in underserved regions, and supporting the development of clean energy solutions. It would also serve as a living memorial to Elon's belief in using one's resources and talents to make the world a better place. The response to the foundation was incredible. People from all walks of life rallied to the cause, donating their time, money, and expertise to help further Elon's mission. Margaret found herself at the helm of a movement that was creating real change in the world. Through the foundation, Margaret was able to connect with others who shared Elon's passion for making a difference. She met with world leaders, innovators, and philanthropists, all eager to contribute to the cause. And while she never forgot the pain of losing Elon, she knew that the best way to honor him was by continuing the work he had started. Years passed, but Margaret never stopped fighting for the causes Elon had championed. She continued to work tirelessly through the foundation, ensuring that his ideals lived on through her efforts. She traveled the world, visiting communities that had benefited from the foundation's work, meeting the people whose lives had been improved by the generosity and vision of one man. One day, while visiting a remote village in South America, Margaret received a letter. It was from a group of Elon's former colleagues at SpaceX who had come together to create a memorial in his honor, a state-of-the-art research facility focused on sustainable energy and space exploration. They wanted Margaret to be a part of the opening ceremony to celebrate Elon's life and the lasting impact he had made on humanity. Margaret smiled, knowing that Elon's work was far from finished. His legacy was not just in the physical structures and achievements he had created, it was in the people he had inspired, And she knew that, through their work, they would continue to honor him for generations to come. As she stood at the opening ceremony, watching the crowd gather and the banners unfurl in Elon's honor, Margaret felt a sense of peace. The world had lost a great man, but his influence would live on forever. And she, too, had found her place in the legacy he had left behind. Elon Musk's sacrifice had been more than just a momentary act of courage. It had become the foundation of a movement, one that would change the world for the better, one life at a time. Margaret sat in her office, surrounded by reports, emails, and phone calls that had all become a regular part of her life. She had just returned from a trip to Africa, where the Foundation's healthcare initiative had made remarkable progress, and the people she had met there had left an indelible mark on her. She had seen firsthand the impact that Elon's legacy had made, not just through the work of his foundation, but through the lives it touched. And yet, there was still so much more to do. Every day, Margaret was reminded of how much work remained in the world. The disparities between communities were vast, and the problems seemed endless. But every time she felt overwhelmed, she reminded herself of the one fundamental truth she had learned from Elon, that small acts of kindness could create ripples of change. She glanced out the window, watching the sunset cast a golden glow over the city. The world was moving forward, and so was she. Margaret was deeply aware that her work was far from over, and every project the Foundation took on seemed to grow larger, more ambitious, as it reached more people in need. It had been several years since that fateful day in the mountains, but Elon's presence still loomed large in her life. His absence left a void, one that couldn't be filled, but his example remained with her, guiding her every step of the way. One of her biggest challenges now was the expansion of the mentorship program. The Foundation had begun a partnership with local schools, giving students access to mentors who could offer guidance, resources, and support. Margaret knew how much these programs meant to the young people they served. She had seen firsthand how transformative it was for children to have someone to turn to, someone who believed in them when the world had given them little reason to believe in themselves. The program had grown beyond her expectations, reaching thousands of students in communities that had been overlooked by many. It wasn't just about academic achievement, it was about empowering these young people to believe they could overcome the obstacles in their path and create the futures they dreamed of. Margaret spent hours meeting with mentors, students, and educators to hear their stories, to understand the struggles they were facing, and to strategize ways to make the program even more effective. She had built a team of dedicated individuals who worked alongside her, all of them passionate about continuing Elon's vision of giving back to those who need it the most. The mentorship program had expanded to include not just students in the United States, but young people across the world. In countries where access to education and resources was limited, the program offered something invaluable: hope. Margaret had always believed that the right support could transform lives, and as she read the letters and emails from students who had been helped by the program, she couldn't help but smile. The stories of success were inspiring. One such story came from a young woman named Amira. She was a high school senior from a small village in Egypt. Amira had dreamed of becoming a doctor but had felt the weight of societal expectations on her shoulders. As a young woman in a traditional family, her aspirations were often dismissed. But after enrolling in the mentorship program, she had been paired with a medical professional who became her mentor. Together, they worked to navigate the challenges Amira faced: financial struggles, family pressures, and the harsh realities of life in a small village. Amira's mentor had helped her apply for scholarships, find resources, and connect with other women who had gone through similar journeys. And now, Amira was on her way to attending a prestigious university to pursue her dreams of becoming a doctor. It was a success story that Margaret cherished, one of many, but it was especially close to her heart because it represented the kind of change Elon had hoped to create, a ripple effect that spread out from one person, touching countless others. Margaret read through Amira's email one more time, moved by the girl's words. "I could never have done this without you. Without the mentorship program. I hope one day I can help other girls like me the way you've helped me. You've given me a future." It was moments like this that made all the hard work worthwhile. As Margaret looked at the email, she thought of all the young people she had met over the years, each of them with their own hopes and dreams. She thought of Zoe, of Jaden, and the countless others who had passed through the program and found their paths in life. But she also thought of Elon. His sacrifice had saved her life, but it had also given her the chance to live out a vision that was larger than any one person. It had given her the chance to help build something lasting, something that would continue to shape the future for generations to come. The next morning, Margaret stood before a room filled with leaders from around the world, each of them gathered to discuss the future of the Elon Musk Foundation. They had convened to brainstorm ways to amplify the foundation's efforts in tackling global crises, including access to clean energy, healthcare, and education. The foundation's reach had expanded significantly over the years, and now Margaret was tasked with leading the charge to create even more global initiatives that would continue Elon's legacy. As she spoke, Margaret could feel the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. It wasn't just about running a nonprofit, it was about continuing a visionary's work. She thought back to the mountains and the snow, to the moment when Elon had given his life to save hers. The room before her was full of people who were eager to make a difference, but Margaret knew that Elon's legacy could only continue if they all worked together with a shared sense of purpose. The discussion turned toward a new project the foundation was looking to launch, an initiative to provide solar-powered clean water systems to underserved areas in Africa. It was a project that could make a tremendous difference in regions where access to clean water was scarce, and Margaret knew it would be one of the most impactful projects the foundation had ever undertaken. She paused for a moment, letting the weight of the room's attention settle around her before speaking again. We can't just give people access to technology. We have to empower them to use it, to build on it, and to ensure that it benefits their communities for generations to come, she said. If we're going to honor Elon's legacy, it's not just about the work we do today. It's about ensuring that the work we do today leads to a brighter tomorrow. The room was silent for a moment before one of the leaders spoke. Margaret, you're right. This is about leaving something behind. A legacy that's more than just a name, more than just technology. It's about creating a future where everyone has the opportunity to succeed. Margaret nodded, a sense of resolve filling her. This was what Elon had wanted. It was about people, not projects. It was about changing lives, not just systems. As the meeting continued, Margaret's mind wandered back to her time with Elon. She thought about the quiet conversations they'd shared, about the way he'd encouraged her to think bigger, to think beyond what seemed possible. He had always pushed her to aim higher, and now, she was ready to take his example and lead with the same fearlessness that he had shown in everything he did. Weeks later, Margaret stood in front of a new solar-powered clean water station in a small village in Africa. The facility was up and running, providing clean water to a community that had once struggled to access it. The project was a success, and as she watched the villagers celebrate, Margaret couldn't help but smile. This was the kind of work Elon had dreamed of, a work that would continue long after he was gone. As she stood there, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From the mountains to this village, and from that single moment of sacrifice, she had seen how one person's actions could change the course of many lives. It wasn't just about the legacy of Elon Musk, it was about the legacy of compassion, of bravery, and of selflessness that had inspired her and countless others to do what was right, no matter the cost. Margaret walked over to the small group of children playing nearby, their faces full of joy as they filled their water bottles from the newly installed station. One of the children looked up at her and smiled, the light in their eyes speaking volumes. It was in that moment that Margaret understood this was just the beginning. The ripple effect of Elon's sacrifice would continue to spread, reaching more communities, touching more lives, and creating change that would never be forgotten. Margaret stood in the midst of the bustling office of the Elon Musk Foundation, her eyes scanning the flurry of activity around her. The foundation had grown exponentially since she had taken the lead, and now, it was at the center of several large-scale initiatives across the globe. The Clean Water Project in Africa had been one of the most successful, but it was only the beginning. As the organization continued to expand, Margaret knew that it wasn't just about helping others, it was about empowering people to help themselves and each other. The growth was exciting but overwhelming. Every day seemed to bring new challenges. Governments, local organizations, and even businesses were reaching out to collaborate, all eager to be part of something that was not just about innovation, but about social responsibility. It was a movement Margaret couldn't have imagined when she first met Elon. She was now managing a team of experts in fields ranging from environmental sustainability to education, but the challenge was keeping the mission clear and focused. They couldn't afford to lose sight of Elon's vision, a vision that wasn't simply about technological advancements but about people, about communities, and about creating a world where opportunities were available to all. One of the most significant new initiatives was a global solar energy project aimed at bringing sustainable power to rural areas. Elon's work in renewable energy was one of his greatest legacies, and now Margaret was committed to ensuring that his dream of widespread energy independence would live on. The program aimed to provide solar panels to off-grid communities in various countries, including India, parts of South America, and remote regions of Southeast Asia. The goal wasn't just to provide electricity, it was to enable these communities to access opportunities they had never had before, from education to healthcare, and to create self-sustaining models that would continue to thrive long after the foundation had left. Margaret met with her team that morning to discuss the next steps in the solar project. The data they had gathered was promising, but there were still logistical and technical challenges that needed to be addressed. As she spoke to the team, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. It hadn't been easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if she was enough to carry forward Elon's vision, especially after the avalanche. But she had learned to rely on the support of her team, the community, and most importantly, the people whose lives were being touched by these projects. Every success story, like Amira's from Egypt, reminded her why they were doing this. Her team members spoke about the next phase of the solar energy project, how they would deploy teams to set up solar farms, how they would train locals to manage the systems, and how they would create long-term partnerships to ensure that the work continued for years to come. As the meeting concluded, Margaret stood at the window of her office, gazing out at the horizon. The city stretched out before her, the hustle and bustle of daily life continuing, but Margaret knew that in some corners of the world, her work was already making a difference. She was part of a movement, one that was reshaping how people lived, how they worked, and how they saw their future. She knew that the road ahead would not always be easy. The challenges were vast, and the world was filled with complexity. But she also knew that if they stayed true to Elon's ideals of innovation, courage, and selflessness, they could continue to break down barriers and provide solutions to problems that seemed insurmountable. The first solar farms were installed in rural India. Margaret made the trip to see the work firsthand, accompanied by a team of engineers and project managers. As the team worked to set up the solar panels, she visited several villages that had never had access to reliable electricity. The people there lived off the grid, using kerosene lamps for light and depending on wood for cooking. It was a life of constant struggle, but the solar panels would change everything. In one village, she met a young woman named Ananya, who had been helping with the setup of the solar panels. Ananya was an aspiring teacher, but she had never been able to go to school after dark. Her family had struggled with the cost of electricity, and so she had spent most evenings helping her mother with chores. But now, with the new solar panels providing light to the village, Ananya was able to study at night, giving her the chance to pursue her dreams. "Thank you," Ananya said as Margaret shook her hand. "You've changed my life. Now I can teach my younger sister, and maybe one day, I'll be able to go to university. It wasn't possible before, but now I see it." Margaret smiled, the weight of the moment sinking in. This was what it was all about. This was why she had worked so hard, why she had sacrificed so much. It wasn't just about the solar panels, it was about giving people the tools they needed to create their own futures. And in Ananya's case, it was about breaking the cycle of poverty, one small step at a time. Later, as Margaret watched the solar panels come to life, she felt a surge of hope. The project was only just beginning, but already, it was changing lives in ways she couldn't have imagined. The Foundation Solar Initiative had become a beacon of possibility for communities that had long been ignored by the rest of the world. Margaret's heart swelled with pride as she visited more communities in South America and Southeast Asia. In Brazil, she saw how the solar farms were providing clean energy to entire villages, improving healthcare, education, and even access to clean water. In rural parts of Cambodia, she witnessed farmers using solar-powered irrigation systems that allowed them to grow crops year-round. The ripple effect of these projects was growing, and Margaret knew that they were just scratching the surface. But the challenges were still immense. Even with the success of the solar initiative, there were constant struggles. Funding, political instability, natural disasters, and lack of infrastructure all presented barriers that the foundation had to navigate. Margaret knew that she couldn't do it alone, and she often found herself leaning on the expertise of her team as well as the partnerships they had built with local governments, businesses, and organizations. Despite the obstacles, the foundation pressed forward, continuing to expand the solar program while also introducing new initiatives aimed at tackling climate change, improving global healthcare, and providing education to the next generation. Margaret was committed to creating lasting, sustainable change, and every project that succeeded was a reminder that the world could be different, that it could be better. Back at the office, things were moving fast. The foundation had become a global force, and with that came an increased sense of responsibility. Margaret's inbox was overflowing with requests from governments, corporations, and grassroots organizations looking to partner with the foundation. It was both exhilarating and exhausting, but Margaret had learned to manage the workload. She had a team that believed in the mission and a community of supporters who had rallied behind the cause. The foundation's work was becoming increasingly complex. Clean energy, education, and healthcare were interwoven, and Margaret knew that the best way to create lasting change was to tackle these issues together. They couldn't just provide energy without access to education or healthcare. The work had to be holistic, addressing all the needs of the communities they served. One of the biggest challenges was how to maintain the momentum. As the foundation grew, it became harder to stay connected with the people who had benefited from their projects. Margaret knew that it was important to keep the human element at the forefront of their work, to never lose sight of the fact that these projects weren't just about statistics or success stories, they were about people. To address this, Margaret began traveling more frequently, visiting the communities directly impacted by their work. She wanted to hear their stories, to see the changes firsthand, and to understand the real impact they were making. During one of her visits to a village in South America, she met Carlos, a local teacher who had been working in a remote school that had just received a solar-powered computer lab through the foundation. Carlos had never been able to afford a computer for his students, and the school had only a few books and outdated teaching materials. But with the new technology, Carlos was able to expand the curriculum, offering his students access to the vast knowledge available online. "I never imagined this was possible," Carlos said, his eyes gleaming with excitement as he showed Margaret the classroom. "These kids now have access to the world. They have a chance to be something they never thought they could be. And it's all thanks to you, to Elon's vision." Margaret was deeply moved. It was moments like this that reminded her why they were doing this work. One computer, one solar panel at a time, they were giving people opportunities, real, tangible opportunities, to change their lives. Margaret knew there would always be more challenges ahead. But she also knew that, like Elon, she had the strength to face them. And just as Elon had done, she would continue to push the limits of what was possible, because she knew that the future was worth fighting for. The ripple effect of Elon Musk's sacrifice and the work of the foundation would continue, changing the world one step at a time. Margaret had promised herself that she would never stop, and with every success, she honored the memory of the man who had given everything for others, a true hero whose legacy would live on for generations to come. Margaret's next project was one that had the potential to change the way the world thought about both sustainability and education. After her success in expanding solar energy programs, she realized that one of the biggest barriers to truly improving people's lives was access to quality education. She had seen it time and again in the communities they had worked with. Young people were eager to learn, but without the right resources, they were limited. Schools in underprivileged areas often lacked basic supplies, and many of the children didn't even have access to consistent electricity. To tackle this problem, Margaret came up with a bold idea, an initiative to provide solar-powered mobile classrooms to remote areas, allowing children to receive quality education regardless of their location. These mobile classrooms would be equipped with solar panels, laptops, internet access, and a library of educational materials. It would not only give children access to the internet and digital resources, but it would also be a lifeline in areas where traditional schooling was unavailable. Her team at the foundation was both excited and overwhelmed by the scope of the project. It was going to take a lot of resources, but they were determined to make it work. Margaret knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but if it succeeded, the mobile classrooms could be a game changer for millions of children around the world. As she sat in her office, reviewing plans for the project, she received a phone call from Amira, the young woman from Egypt whose life had been transformed by the foundation's mentorship program. Amira had gone on to attend university, and now, she was studying engineering. Margaret had always kept in touch with her, and hearing from Amira always lifted her spirits. "Margaret," Amira said, her voice filled with excitement. "I've been thinking about the mobile classrooms you're planning, and I think I can help. I've been studying renewable energy, and I'd love to contribute to the project. I believe I can help design the power systems for the classrooms, making them even more efficient and cost-effective." Margaret smiled, feeling a wave of pride wash over her. She had seen Amira grow so much over the years, and to know that she wanted to give back to the foundation was incredibly fulfilling. "Amira, that's amazing. I'd love for you to be a part of it. Your experience with renewable energy will be invaluable, and your perspective as someone who has been through the program will make your input even more meaningful." Amira's enthusiasm was contagious, and soon, she was working alongside the foundation's engineers to design a sustainable and efficient system for the mobile classrooms. Margaret knew that this collaboration would not only strengthen the project but also inspire other young people to pursue their dreams, just as Amira had. Months passed as the design and logistics for the mobile classrooms came together. Margaret's team worked with solar engineers, educators, and architects to create a classroom model that could be deployed to the most remote locations. The goal was to ensure that the classrooms could be set up easily, requiring minimal resources from the communities. The solar panels would power everything, from computers to lights, allowing children to study day or night. The computers would be loaded with educational software and resources, and the mobile classroom itself would be a comfortable space where students could gather, learn, and grow. But the biggest hurdle was securing the funding to make it all happen. The foundation had made a huge impact over the years, but the mobile classroom initiative was by far the most expensive project they had taken on. Margaret spent countless hours meeting with donors, pitching the idea to corporations, and reaching out to governments for support. The breakthrough came when a tech giant agreed to partner with the foundation. They would provide the necessary laptops, internet access, and educational software, ensuring that the mobile classrooms were equipped with the best resources possible. With their support, the project was finally able to move forward. As the first mobile classroom was built and ready for deployment, Margaret couldn't contain her excitement. This was it, the project that could change the lives of millions of children. She knew that the impact of the mobile classrooms would ripple out far beyond the children who would directly benefit. This was about breaking barriers, about creating opportunities that didn't exist before. The first mobile classroom was deployed in a rural village in Kenya. It was a place where electricity was scarce, and children had to travel long distances just to attend school. But now, with the mobile classroom, education was coming to them. The solar-powered classroom was set up in the middle of the village, near the local school, and within hours, children gathered around, curious and eager to see what the foundation had brought them. As the sun set and the classroom came to life, the children's faces lit up with wonder. The laptops powered up, and the educational software was activated. For the first time, they could access information from around the world. Science, mathematics, literature, and more, all available at the touch of a button. The mobile classroom became a beacon of hope, showing them that education was within their reach. Margaret stood off to the side, watching the children interact with the technology. She could see the excitement in their eyes, the spark of curiosity that she had witnessed so many times in others who had been given opportunities they never thought possible. Ananya, the young woman from India who had been instrumental in the solar energy projects, was there as well, helping the students get familiar with the system. "These kids," she said, her voice filled with joy, "are going to change the world. The opportunities they now have are endless." Margaret smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She had known from the start that the mobile classrooms weren't just about technology or energy, they were about changing lives. These children, who had once been limited by their circumstances, were now empowered to shape their own futures. The success of the first mobile classroom was just the beginning. Soon after the deployment in Kenya, additional classrooms were set up in other countries, from Bangladesh to Peru, from Nigeria to Nepal. Each community was different, but the need for access to quality education was universal. As the Mobile Classroom Initiative grew, Margaret and her team focused on making the project scalable, ensuring that it could reach even more remote locations. They developed new, more efficient designs for the solar panels, allowing them to be installed in even more challenging environments. They worked with local governments to integrate the classrooms into existing educational systems, creating partnerships that would ensure the sustainability of the project. Margaret also saw the importance of cultural sensitivity in each deployment. In some regions, the traditional classroom model wouldn't work. They had to adapt to the local customs and needs. In some areas, it meant creating after-school programs for children who worked during the day. In others, it meant tailoring the curriculum to reflect the local community's history, language, and culture. It wasn't just about education, it was about connecting with the communities in a way that respected their unique challenges and opportunities. Margaret spent hours working with local leaders and educators to ensure that the classrooms were integrated into the community in a way that made sense. Years passed, and the mobile classrooms became a global phenomenon. Millions of children around the world had gained access to education they never thought possible. Many of them, like Amira, had gone on to pursue careers in medicine, technology, and the arts. Others had used the knowledge they gained from the classrooms to improve their local communities, solving problems that had once seemed insurmountable. Margaret had seen firsthand the impact of education, of giving people the resources to create better lives for themselves. She had seen the way it empowered young women to break free from the cycles of poverty and societal expectations, and she had witnessed the way it opened doors for young men to pursue their dreams, whether in science, business, or the arts. As she stood at the helm of the foundation, looking at the ripple effect of Elon's sacrifice, she knew that the journey wasn't over. The road to a better future was long, but they were on the right path. And in every face she saw, whether in Kenya, Bangladesh, or Peru, she knew that Elon's vision had come to life, that his legacy had changed the world. The mobile classrooms had become a symbol of hope, and Margaret had become a symbol of the power of one person to make a difference. She had never imagined that her life would be shaped in this way, that she would carry on the legacy of a man who had given everything to help others. But now, she was proud to know that her efforts, and the efforts of everyone at the foundation, would continue to shape the world for generations to come. Margaret's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of her phone ringing. She glanced down at the screen and saw a familiar name, Anya. Since the early days of the Foundation's solar projects, Ananya had become one of the key players in the Mobile Classrooms initiative. She was more than just an engineer. She had become a close friend and an integral part of the team. Margaret, Ananya greeted her with enthusiasm on the other end of the line. I've just finished reviewing the new design, and I think we've made a breakthrough. This new solar panel design is more efficient and less costly to produce. Margaret's heart raced with excitement. Tell me more. We've reduced the size of the solar panels without sacrificing power. It means we can bring more classrooms to even more remote areas. I think this could be the key to scaling even faster than we had originally planned. With your leadership and the Foundation's network, we can reach more children than ever before. Margaret smiled. This was it. The moment she had been working toward, a way to reach even more communities in need. The new, smaller, more efficient solar panels would lower the cost and increase accessibility, making the mobile classrooms more viable in even the most rural and remote regions of the world. That's incredible, Ananya. This could change everything. We need to make sure we're ready for this. How soon can we start producing the new panels? We're already in the process of working with local manufacturers. I'd say within the next 6 months, we can begin distributing them to all our active projects. Margaret nodded, her mind already racing with the logistics of expanding the program. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. After hanging up with Ananya, Margaret sat back in her chair, deep in thought. The solar-powered classrooms had already transformed so many lives, and now, with this new development, they had the potential to change even more. But Margaret knew that it wasn't just about bringing technology to the world, it was about creating lasting, sustainable change. Her work had always been driven by a belief that every child deserved access to an education, no matter their background or location. But now, with the mobile classrooms expanding faster than ever before, Margaret realized that she had an even bigger responsibility. The future of millions of children was in their hands. She had witnessed firsthand how the mobile classrooms were impacting students' lives. Whether it was a young boy in Kenya learning to code, a girl in India using online resources to pursue a medical degree, or a group of teenagers in South America working on their own sustainability projects. Each of them had been given the gift of opportunity, and it was clear that education was the gateway to empowerment. But there was still so much work to do. The mobile classrooms were one step, but there were so many more communities in need. And as the foundation grew, so too did its responsibility to the world. Margaret had made it her life's work to bring about positive change, but she knew the path forward would require continuous effort and collaboration. The success of the mobile classrooms in Africa had been a game changer, but now it was time to focus on new regions that had been on Margaret's mind for a while. Southeast Asia had been difficult to reach due to natural disasters, political instability, and logistical challenges. But the technology had made it possible to bring solar-powered solutions into these areas in a way that was more sustainable than ever before. The next target was Vietnam, where rural areas had been devastated by typhoons and floods, leaving much of the infrastructure in ruins. Children in these areas often had to walk miles to get to school, and many of the schools lacked the necessary resources to keep up with the increasing demand for education. The foundation had already partnered with several NGOs in the area, and now, with the new solar panel technology, they were ready to roll out the first batch of mobile classrooms to remote Vietnamese villages. Margaret and her team worked closely with the local communities to assess their needs. They learned that the schools in rural areas had struggled to keep up with the demands of modern education. While the rest of the world was rapidly moving forward with technology, many of these schools still relied on outdated textbooks and chalkboards. It was a daunting task to bring change to such a large area, but Margaret had always believed in the power of community. By working together, they could overcome the obstacles that seemed insurmountable. She coordinated with local leaders, and soon, the first mobile classroom was on its way to the heart of a village in northern Vietnam. When the mobile classroom arrived in the village, the children were initially skeptical. They had never seen anything like it. The idea of learning on computers and having access to educational software was a new concept. But after the first lesson, their eyes lit up. They saw that this was more than just a classroom. It was a doorway to the world. Margaret stood outside, watching the children inside the mobile classroom, their faces glowing with excitement as they learned about math, science, and languages from the computers. It was a moment of pure joy. These children were no longer limited by their circumstances. They now had access to the kind of education that could change their futures. Over the next few weeks, more mobile classrooms were deployed throughout Vietnam, reaching areas that had once seemed impossible to access. The success of the program was beyond anything Margaret had imagined, and it filled her with an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. Margaret's journey had been filled with obstacles, but it had also been a testament to the power of partnerships. The foundation's success had always been about collaboration, not just with governments and businesses, but with the local communities. They understood their own needs better than anyone else, and by working together, they were able to ensure the success of each project. As the mobile classroom initiative continued to expand, Margaret began forming new partnerships with tech companies and philanthropists who shared the foundation's vision. These partnerships allowed the foundation to access even more resources, from cutting-edge technology to financial support. With these new allies, Margaret was able to accelerate the growth of the mobile classroom project and take it to places it had never reached before. But Margaret was also mindful of the fact that the foundation had to maintain its focus on sustainability. It wasn't just about handing over technology, it was about creating lasting impact. The foundation's work was centered around ensuring that the communities they served could continue to thrive independently long after the initial support had been given. This was what made the foundation's mission so powerful. It wasn't just about giving people access to resources, it was about teaching them how to use those resources to change their own lives. Margaret often found herself thinking about Elon's vision, the vision that had driven her to pursue this work in the first place. Elon had always believed in pushing boundaries, in thinking bigger than anyone else, and in finding solutions to the world's most pressing problems. Margaret felt that same drive now. She wasn't just continuing his work, she was carrying forward the spirit of his vision, determined to make the world a better place for future generations. As the foundation continued to grow, so did its global impact. The mobile classrooms in Vietnam were just one example of how the foundation was changing the landscape of education. With new partnerships and more resources, Margaret's team was now able to expand the program to even more countries, from Indonesia to Mexico, from Bangladesh to Ecuador. Each new location brought its own challenges, but Margaret and her team had learned to adapt. Looking back at everything that had been accomplished, Margaret felt a deep sense of gratitude. There were moments of doubt, moments when the challenges seemed insurmountable, but with each success, the foundation's reach grew. More children were learning, more communities were thriving, and the world was beginning to see the power of sustainable education. As Margaret looked out over the horizon, she knew that this was just the beginning. The mobile classrooms, the solar-powered solutions, and the mentorship programs were all part of a much larger movement. A movement toward change. And with every new partnership, every new project, the foundation was getting closer to fulfilling Elon's vision, a world where everyone had the opportunity to succeed, no matter where they came from or how limited their resources had been. The ripple effect of Elon's sacrifice was continuing to spread, shaping the world one classroom, one child, and one opportunity at a time.